Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And my name is Dr. Gary Dix and I am Chemicals and Reach Consultant here at TSG Consulting. Also joining me, my colleagues Dr. Stephen Brennan and Dr. Karen Cooksey, who will over the next 30 to 40 minutes or so outline everything non-GB companies need to know about UK Reach and only representatives and everything that entails. So I'll just briefly introduce myself and my colleagues. So firstly, we have Dr. Stephen Brennan. So Stephen is the head of our industrial and specialty chemicals team here at TSG. It's essentially mainly a REACH team. So we're involved with all aspects of REACH projects and developing those REACH consulting projects. And Stephen actually, previously to joining TSG, spent many years in the aerospace industry. Next, we have my colleague Karen, Dr. Karen Cooksey. Karen is vastly experienced in EU REACH, so over a decade's experience there, so a real REACH specialist and very much the expert there. And lastly, but not least, we have myself. I'm Gary. So I've been with TSG for about 5 months or so and involved with REACH projects as well, REACH compliance assessments and everything that entails. Previously to joining TSG, I was in the fragrance industry for about 14 years or so, so involved with all their chemical compliance activities. So really bringing that downstream user perspective and the wants and needs of that section of the supply chain. Okay, so for those of you who are not aware of TSG or don't know very much about us, we've been providing companies all over the world with regulatory guidance and scientific expertise for over 30 years now. And what we do is we help clients globally address the technical and regulatory issues in taking their products to market in multiple regions throughout the world. Our scientific expertise, regulatory knowledge, and all our combined understanding of those local nuances that really make this work interesting, shall we say, we like to help enable our clients to navigate that complex and ever-changing regulatory landscape. And we serve a number of key markets and sectors. Example, we've got agricultural, industrial, consumer, food and beverage, and many other sectors as well. And our teams comprise scientists and regulatory experts, many of whom have previously held positions at regulatory agencies and in a variety of other industries as well, to give us a real variety of perspectives in our teams. Really value that. So this combination of scientific knowledge, regulatory expertise, knowledge of how different institutions and industries operate and in their supply chains really helps us to provide our clients with that well-rounded guidance. So let's look at what we're going to be discussing today. So we're going to start with an overview of UK REACH, and then we'll move on to looking at the only representative. So what's the real definition of that? What does that mean, and what can the only representative do? And then we'll look at how you can comply with the requirements of UK REACH to continue accessing this market here. And then how to manage your compliance costs in the most cost-effective way. And then lastly, how TSG can help you to do those things, to be compliant. Okay, so we'll start with an overview of UK REACH. So now at the end of the transition period, the end of last year, we have this phrase called lift and shift, and the EU REACH regulation was lifted and shifted, as the phrase suggests, into UK law. So what they've done there is retain the key principles of EU REACH. So kind of the nuts and bolts of it are pretty much the same, with some small modifications to make it more applicable to the UK market. So you don't have references to the community or to ECHA, for example. You'd have references to the equivalent in this market. And there were some additional transitional arrangements put in place to give companies time to comply with these new requirements, because this is all new to some extent. And it applies to GB-based companies And this is a really important, the first I mentioned nuances. This is the first nuance, is that UK REACH, although we call it UK REACH, does not apply to Northern Ireland. So it applies to GB companies. So that's England, Scotland, Wales, and associated islands. So your import into Northern Ireland does not count in terms of UK REACH. And the UK Health and Safety Executive acts as the responsible agency for in this regard. Okay, now just to give some example of these transitional arrangements that were put in place, colleagues are going to go into some detail on some of these. So this is literally just some examples for you. I won't go into details here. So we have the grandfathering of registrations and grandfathering of product process orientated research and development exemptions. Grandfather those over. Article 26 inquiries, downstream user import notifications, and Northern Ireland notifications as well. Okay, so now I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Karen, who's going to take us through the only representative.
Hi, Gary. I'll fill this one for Karen, actually.
Okay, sure. Okay, go for it.
Thank you. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about what is an only representative under the regulation and some of the complexities associated with that. So I think it's important to start with the legal definition or the provisions under the REACH regulations that allows for an only representative to be established. On the slide, you'll see the legal text as it is in UK law. As Gary mentioned, UK REACH is a lift and shift of EU REACH, and the legal text that you see here, 99% of it is what's written in the EU legal text, with just some minor modifications. In this case, there's two statutory instruments which updates this specific article of the REACH regulation to make it into UK law. The first statutory update changed from the word community to United Kingdom. And with the establishment of the Northern Ireland Protocol towards the end of the transition period, another statutory instrument was created to change from United Kingdom to Great Britain. As Gary mentioned previously, UK REACH only applies to Great Britain. So a few important points here that we will talk about in subsequent slides is about companies who are able to establish an only representative, who can act as an only representative, and what skills and experiences that they need to have in order to take on that role, as well as some of the actions that an only representative should undertake in order to continue compliance with the regulation. And these are mainly the requirements that importers normally have under the regulation. And in effect, the only representative can undertake all of the obligations that are mandated for importers. Okay, we'll just bring out a little bit of the detail to discuss within the definition to discuss that a little bit further. So only by mutual appointment can a non-GB manufacturer, formulator, or a producer of an article appoint an only representative. And mutual agreement can be, it's a contractual arrangement, and it could be anything from a contract with terms and conditions through to a letter signed by both parties, which says that Company A is acting for Company B as an only representative. An only representative under UK REACH must be a natural or legal entity that's physically established in Great Britain. This is important because some companies may want or may have thought about using virtual offices as their only representative under UK REACH, but the regulation does not allow that. And one of the reasons why it doesn't allow that is that the only representative needs to have a background in the practical handling of substances and the information related to them. And that's straight from the Article 8 of the REACH regulation. And luckily enough, here at TSG, we have a team of consultants that do indeed have practical handling of substances and the information related to them. And as Gary said, we have our consultants that come from industry, consultants that come from regulators, and we also have consultants that are true and true consultants. Next point is that only representatives shall keep available and up-to-date information on quantities imported and customers sold to. So as an only representative, one of the tasks that TSG does is on an annual basis request this information from our clients. And we need this information in order to maintain compliance with the regulation, both under Article 8. And of course, if anything happens to your tonnage volumes, that may trigger an update to your registration dossier as an example, or even if some of your substances were deemed as substances of very high concern, that would trigger actions that we need to undertake in order to comply with the regulation. And the final point here is that an only representative should keep available and up-to-date information on supply of the latest update of the safety data sheet. So this is the safety data sheet for your product. And of course, the substances within your product are contained within that. And TSG on an annual basis retrieves safety data sheets from clients to ensure that we have the most up-to-date version. And that's the basic requirements for only representatives as mandated under the regulation. So I mentioned previously that, what role can only representatives have under the regulation? Well, in effect, only representatives can undertake all of the obligations that are placed on importers. And you'll see under Article 8 there, it says the obligations on importers under this title, and this title being registration. And then second point is to comply with all other obligations of importers under the rest of the regulation. And that could be everything from Article 7.2 notifications for SVHCs, right through to applying for authorization for substances that are on the authorization list. So some of the tasks that only representatives might undertake, and these tasks are really your compliance actions. We talk about maintaining volumes and maintaining tonnages. That's really all in preparation for undertaking necessary compliance actions whenever the time is right. And those compliance actions tasks might include submitting new registrations or updating existing registration dossiers, submitting notifications to the European Chemicals Agency as an example, creating or helping create and to help support and submit authorization applications for continued use of those substances that are on the authorization list after their sunset date, and maintaining safety data sheets. And also, as I mentioned previously, a key part of an only representative is to continually review your product portfolio and substances that are contained there within, and identify if any change to the regulation can trigger another compliance action. As I said before, whenever a registration dossier is submitted to, for example, the UKHSE, they would review it as part of an evaluation. They may see that further regulatory controls is necessary for the safe use of that substance, and they could set that substance on a regulatory pathway which requires compliance actions, such as authorization applications or compliance with restrictions. So an important thing to consider with an only representative is the costs for compliance. In this case, what we wanted to do is to model two different scenarios, which you might want to work through with your own business in order to determine if an only representative is right for your supply chain. So the two scenarios that we modeled here is for registration for the substances contained within your products by your GB-based customers. And second scenario is a registration of those substances via an only representative. And just to clarify, it's your GB-based customers acting as importers that are duty bound by the regulation to import any substance that's imported into Great Britain in volumes greater than 1 tonne per year, unless an exemption applies. There's no registration on non-GB, or there's no obligations on non-GB actors unless you decide to work with an only representative. So in order to model these two scenarios appropriately, we've applied the following assumptions. We're talking about the registration of just one substance. We are assuming that there's going to be three GB-based customers for your substance. We're assuming that no dossier maintenance is required. And the data for meeting the information requirements set out by the regulation in order to make a registration is available via a letter of access. We're also assuming that the cost categories are broadly similar, and I'll just explain a little bit more about what I mean by that in a second. So you may know that the costs for a registration are not insignificant, and we have broken it down here into 4 cost categories. The first cost category is the generation of substance identity data. So for your registration, or for your GB customers registration, they need to prove that the substance that they're importing is indeed the substance that they're importing. So your GB-based customer will have to generate information on that substance. It will be analytical data to prove that that's indeed the substance that they're importing. And the costs for doing that depend on the substance that's being imported. Some of the more complex substances, where have a complicated substance identity, it may cost more to generate that information or that analytical data. The next cost category is for a letter of access. As you may know, in order to make a registration under both the UK and also in the EU REACH regulation, registrants must provide information related to that substance, and that's so-called information requirements. The information that's needed for a registration depends on the tonnage of that substance which an actor is importing or manufacturing on the market. And the more or the greater the volume of substance that's being imported and manufactured, the greater the information requirements. This information, for the most part, has been generated under EU REACH for registrations under that regime. And for the purposes of UK REACH, in a lot of cases, companies that want to register under UK REACH, they can buy a letter of access to those data sets from those data owners, and there will be a cost associated with that. The third cost category here is the UK HSE registration fees. And again, that's kind of weighted depending on the volume of substance which is being placed on the market, and also it's weighted against your company size. Smaller companies have lower costs. And the fourth cost category that's important here is the time that it takes for you and people and your colleagues in order to take the necessary action to comply with the regulation, and also work, if you choose to, with consultancies and the fees associated with that. And we can see here, under this scenario, we have 3 customers for a non-GB manufacturer formulator that are importing into the Great Britain market. And each of those importers or your customers have to undertake a separate registration. And so the costs of each of those registrations are, in fact, triple of what it could be. Just moving on to the next slide. And this is scenario 2, where we've got a case where the registration is for the supply chain is undertaken by an only representative. So we have the same cost categories, substance identity data, letter of access, the UK HSE registration fees, colleagues' time and consultancy fees, And an additional fifth cost category here is only representative fees. And we can see here that the costs for compliance are reduced significantly by using an only representative. Now remember, if a non-GB manufacturer or formulator chooses to work with an only representative and registers substances via an only representative, then the GB-based customers who are normally importers would be regarded as downstream users under this regulation. And what that means is that downstream users are exempt from the requirement to register substances. So if we look at a summary of compliance costs for scenario 1 versus scenario 2, we can see here that by working with an only representative, the costs for compliance within your supply chain is much reduced. And here, whenever we modeled with 3 substances, the compliance costs could be reduced by approximately 60% when an only representative is used. If it was a case that there was only one customer based in Great Britain, then the cost saving, in my estimation, would be negligible. But if there was, again, the more GB-based customers, the greater the saving that can be achieved within the supply chain by the use of an only representative. Of course, there's some other considerations for whenever you want or may want to use an only representative. If you choose or wanted your GB-based customers to make their own registrations, then they may request information from you in order to do that properly. And you may feel that some of the information that they need is confidential business information to you. And that might present some challenges because your GB-based customer will need that information in order to register the substance that they need to. By working with an only representative, you can prevent the supply of that confidential business information to your GB-based customer. And in fact, that information would be retained by the only representative. The only representative will have the information that they will need in order to make the registrations on behalf of the supply chain. And you will be working under a contract that is sure to have confidentiality provisions. Another thing to consider is indirect supply chains. So if your company that's based outside of Great Britain supplies to another company based outside of Great Britain, and your customer outside of Great Britain wants to export onto the Great Britain market, it's more commercially attractive if you have already registered those substances on behalf of the supply chain. Now, it gets tricky because the volumes of substances that are imported onto the market need to be fully transparent to an only representative to ensure that the appropriate registration information requirements have been met. So in this case, an only representative may work as a trustee to gather information from your non-GB customer. And that would be an appropriate relationship to have where you had many non-GB customers and they needed to supply information to you on their exports to the GB market, but they can't do that because it impacts on their business confidentiality. So they can provide that information instead to an only representative, and the supply chain will have enough information that it needs in order to make the appropriate registrations. Another consideration is that if your company based outside of Great Britain has a subsidiary based in Great Britain, that subsidiary may act as the importer and may be wanting to undertake those registrations for that import. And that is an ideal scenario because with regards to the cost, it's a one-to-one business. It's one importer into Great Britain, one registration is required, and there's no only representative fees in that case. However, if you ever wanted to supply, your non-GB company wanted to supply another customer based in Great Britain, then that other customer will then need to make their registrations at some point in the future. If the non-GB was to appoint an only representative from the start, even when they're just supplying their own GB-based business, having chosen an only representative allows them flexibility in the supply chain so that they can move and change with the needs of the GB market and supply direct to GB-based customers that are not related to their business, and in fact supply to third parties. And then finally, the cost for only representatives or using an only representative may be passed on to GB customers. And of course, the more GB customers that you have, the per GB customer cost for compliance is much reduced. And that means that if you passed on the costs there, that the costs won't be significant. And you'll be maintaining the levels of profitability that you need from your business and passing those costs on to your GB-based customers. Okay, so that's everything that I wanted to talk about with regards to what an only representative can do in the supply chain. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Karen to talk about how to comply with the UK REACH requirements.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. In the next few slides, I'm going to describe in a bit more detail the next steps to achieve compliance in the UK in GB. As a non-GB based company, then these steps must be undertaken via an only representative. There is 3 elements that I wanted to discuss today, and those 3 elements the first element is grandfathering, notifications or inquiry dossiers, and then the second element is actually the registration dossier, and then the third element is actually maintaining your dossier and maintaining compliance. So the first one, I mentioned, is grandfathering. So who is this for? It's for GB-based holders of EU REACH registrations, but this also includes GB-based only representatives, which previously held EU REACH registrations for non-EU companies. So this may be relevant to a number of you on the webinar today. So what is grandfathering? Well, it means that any relevant EU REACH registrations will be also recognised under UK REACH. It allows you to have continued access to the GB market. The good thing with grandfathering is that there'll be no registration fee from the agency, but the deadline for submission is actually very close. It's going to be the end of April of this year, so you haven't got long left. The grandfathering application requires you to submit a member dossier from your existing EU REACH registration dossier. But also you need to have details on your EU REACH registration number and the date of submission, and any information on any ECHA decisions should also be included in the application. So moving on to downstream user notifications. So the concept of pre-registration does not exist under UK REACH. The equivalent is the downstream user import notifications, also known as shortened to DUINs. And who is this for? So it's for manufacturers, formulators and article producers based outside of Great Britain that wish to appoint a GB-based OR. And at this point, you'll be notified on behalf of your GB-based importers. So imports must have occurred prior to the transition period to be able for the notification to be made. And the notification must be submitted to HSE to continue the import into the GB market. And the notification itself consists of information on the substance, so you're notifying basic identification details and any physical chemical properties that you can provide. Basically, just as much information as you have available on the substance can be included in the application. The HSE is also not charging a fee for this notification. And the deadline for DUINs is the end of October of this year. But by submitting a notification, it allows you to continue your imports of of your substance into GB for potentially up to 6 years, because the tonnage ban for 1 to 100 tonnes is actually the end of October 2027. So you'll have 6 years where you won't have to do anything further other than submit your notification. But as we've previously alluded on this presentation, that non-GB companies are unable to submit DUINs directly. You've got to have an only representative to submit them on your behalf. So we also, one of the things that we're telling our clients is to submit as many DUINs as you may need, mainly because HSE aren't charging a fee for this service. It also allows you to have market access up to potentially 6 years without having to pay any kind of fees. But as I say, continue to access to the market for maybe 2, 4, or 6 years, a zero cost insurance policy. It'll also mean that you won't have to submit an inquiry dossier as in the next 6 years, but that will be needed as you go on to do the full registration. But I think the most important part is that it will allow you to be, if you submit your DUIN early enough, you will be involved in all the substance discussions with other GB-based importers from the start of the process. The main take-home message as well is that if you do submit the DUINs, you don't have to actually proceed with the full registration. You can actually assess your, how much you're actually importing into the UK later on within the next 6 years. The other option is Article 26 inquiries, and this is for anything that you wish to start, new substances you wish to import into Great Britain. So where the provisions for grandfathering and downstream using locations do not apply to you. So the process for compiling inquiry dossiers is analogous to EU REACH, and so the requirements are virtually the same. But once your inquiry is accepted, you'll be able to see who else has also registered, who else has also notified or grandfathered the substance, and you'll be able to be involved in all the data sharing process as well. So moving on to the next step, which is registrations. So once you've either submitted your grandfathering application and DUIN or inquiry, his next step is to produce a full registration dossier. And the deadlines for submitting a full registration dossier depends on your tonnage. There's either 2, 4, or 6 years following the DUIN deadline. As I mentioned before, for DUINs, you are expected to submit an inquiry dossier first, followed by a full registration dossier, but again before the relevant tonnage deadline. For new substance inquiries, expected that the full registration dossier will be the deadline for the submission of the full registration dossier will be detailed in the letter that you receive from HSE once it's accepted. For substances that were previously registered under EU REACH, we expect that will be one of the tonnage deadlines detailed by HSE. Again, non-GB based companies are unable to undertake registrations on the UK REACH. An only representative must do this on your behalf. So just detailed on this slide, I'm not going to go through the detail on this slide, and I've just presented it there for you to have a look at the tonnage deadlines, the registration deadlines for all for the different tonnage levels, and they're there for you to look at after this webinar. So the third and final element of compliance with UK REACH is actually the ongoing dossier maintenance. And it's a common misconception that once the registration is submitted, there is no work to be done. However, REACH is an ongoing system of work. There'll be evaluations by UK HSE. There may be new uses that could become apparent to you. There might be classification updates. And just like ECHA, the UK HSE will require you to update your dossier on a regular basis. And the UK only representative should offer this service as part of your ongoing relationship. I just want to briefly touch on authorisations. So any existing EU authorisations on the list have been retained under UK REACH, and there are special transitional measures that apply for any authorisations applications that were made to ECHA prior to the transition date. and they're not yet been granted. But again, the process for applying for authorisation is under UK REACH is similar to EU REACH process, but the key point is noted that new authorisations must be applied for via an owner representative. Okay, I'd like to hand back over to my colleague Gary.
Okay, thanks Karen, and thanks Stephen as well. So very thorough assessments there of not only what the owner representative is, what their role is, but why that's a cost-effective option for you, and also then from Karen the actual mechanisms of complying with UK REACH. So I'm very mindful that you've all had lots of information thrown at you, and I omitted to mention at the beginning that these presentation slides will be made available to you afterwards. So don't worry about making loads and loads of notes. And also, if you have any questions, please submit those to the Q&A box. And we'll get through as many of those as we can. Okay, so next we're going to look at managing costs. So we've had a kind of detailed assessment, a detailed kind of look at the situation and compliance mechanisms. We'll just take a step back really and think of how to best manage your overall costs of your compliance strategy, because at the end of the day there are lots of costs associated with these things. You want to get the best value for money, you want to be doing things in the most cost-effective way possible. So the best way to do that is to be absolutely certain of what it is you need to do as a company to comply. And then you're only doing those things, you're only paying for those things, and you're getting compliance in the most cost-effective way. So the best compliance assessment you can do to achieve that should take into account these three elements here. So the first is our supply chain. Now, supply chain can be very, very simple. It can just be you're making the product and you're passing on to a customer and that's it. But however, we know that in reality, they're often a lot more complex than that. You can have multiple steps. You can have a manufacturer, a distributor of the raw materials. You can then have a formulator of mixtures into a contract manufacturer, into a retailer, and then the consumer. So it can be very, very complex. So it's really worth taking time to map these out to see right from start to finish. So you can really see the points in that chain where you have requirements, you have things you need to do in order to comply with the regional laws and requirements. So once you've mapped that out, you can then more fully understand what your role is in that supply chain. Because certainly with REACH, EU REACH, UK REACH and other REACH-like regulations, different actors under REACH have different obligations. So an importer will have different obligations on them to a distributor, for example, or a downstream user. So it's really important to kind of really nail down what your role is, so then you know what it is you need to do. And the last thing can often be the most time-consuming, which is your inventory. Again, so coming from the industry, I've come from inventory is king. We're stripping things down to their substance levels, and so you know exactly what's coming from where, and then it allows you to assess tonnages of those substances that are being imported around, so you know what your requirements are. So REACH really primarily deals with substances, either on their own or in articles or in mixtures or in products, and it's really, really important to, like I say, to kind of have that inventory. And if you're dealing with complex products, that could be the complex thing. But once you have this set up, that can become part of your systems, and that can even allow you to track what's going where. So if you have new obligations, or you have issues that pinch points that you may want to kind of look at and take care of. But if you have these three kind of elements, that will allow you to know what it is you need to do. Obviously TSG can kind of advise you with all of this. And so once you've done that, you can then, as your product from that could be a compliance calendar. So you know what you need to do by when, because you don't necessarily need to do everything in 1 year. You can spread it out. So you spread your costs out, you spread your person time out through the whole project the length of time. So we've got an example here which looks at submitting downstream user notifications and then leading on to full registrations. So if you've mapped out, you might know that a certain number of your substances are out of scope, so you don't need to worry about them. But then for the remaining ones that are in scope and are of interest, you submit your downstream user notifications, and of course you may choose to submit downstream user notifications for more, just to give yourself a little bit of insurance, as we've heard earlier. And then you've got your different registration timelines. So if you're using a substance or importing a substance, sorry, from within the 1 to 10 tons a year tonnage band, you don't have to actually submit that full registration until 2027. So having this calendar allows you to map out all those. So your high use chemicals, you can take care of those registrations first, and then so on and so on and so on. You wouldn't be able to do this element if you hadn't taken care of what we just on the previous slide and mapped out the supply chain, what your role is, what your products are, what your substances are, and at the end of the day, the tonnages as well. So really, really important to do that. Also, this is really, really important. So some of you, hopefully many of you, will need to work with owner representatives, but it's really important to choose the right one for you, because you will find the market is, I wouldn't say maybe not flooded, but there are a lot of companies offering this service. And it's really, really important that you take the time to maybe speak to a few and get the right one for you. And there are some factors you might want to take into consideration as part of your decision on who to go with. So you look at their company history and experience. So how long have they been going? What's been their experience? Look at their experience in EU REACH, if they've been involved in consortia before and managing those, for example, because UK REACH is new. It's a new thing. No one has more than a few months experience with UK REACH because it is brand new. So you need to look at EU REACH. What's the company's experience with dealing with that? And that will give you an idea of their level of expertise and, you know, that they know what they're doing. You can also look at their staff. I mean, we're fairly open about, you know, you can look up who works for TSG and what our specialities are, and a little bit of biography information. So look at that as well. Also, lastly, really important point, check carefully what's being offered. And this comes to pricing transparency, really. So at TSG, we're really keen on laying out what's what you're getting, what you're paying for, and we do that in different work streams. And you may find that on the ongoing dossier maintenance, so the final element of what Karen talked about, you may find with some owner representatives that that's not part of the deal. The service being offered is up to registration, and that's it. But as we know, registration is not the end of the process; it's part of the process. So it's really important to take that into consideration as well when you're making your decisions. Okay, so I'm now going to pass back to Stephen, and I know I'm correct this time in who I'm handing over to. So Stephen's going to explain to you how TSG can help you with all these things that we've talked about.
Thanks very much, Gary. So as Gary mentioned in the last slide, TSG tries to be as transparent as possible for the costs of our owner representative service. And one of the ways that we aim to achieve this is by breaking the work down into 3 work streams. Work stream 1 is everything from point of contract through to the downstream user notifications or Article 26 inquiries. So in fact, rough timescales for that are, you know, from when UK REACH started this year through to 20th of October later this year. Of course, that just gets you the initial notifications or grandfathering or Article 26 inquiries submitted to the UK HSE. And after that point, that's kind of when the real work begins. So that's where we have work stream 2, and that's around submitting registrations. Through this part of the process, it's really working with your other joint submission, or actually under UK REACH, it's called substance group. It's working with the substance group members to find out who's going to be lead registrant and how they're going to share costs of the data. And the timescales for that roughly can be between, you know, October this year to the relevant registration deadline. And that could be, you know, in 2023, 2025, 2027, depending on the tonnage imported and the intrinsic hazardous properties of the substances. However, with the Article 26 inquiries for new substances to the market, the deadlines, I understand, will be provided by the UK HSE on submission of the Article 26. And the final work stream that we have here is maintaining registration. So this is all of the work that is necessary after registration has been submitted. And we have an annual cycle here at TSG where we would collect tonnage information, information on customers, safety data sheets from clients, and we would interrogate that to see if any further action is necessary. And we will inform you if any action is required to maintain compliance in your supply chain. The other thing that we do as part of this work stream is review updates to the different regulatory lists, such as the restriction list, the authorization list, the CORAP list, or the candidate list for substances of very high concern. If one of your substances in your portfolio isn't added to any of those lists or intended to be added to any of those lists, it can affect your market access. And this is something that we keep a watch of so that we can proactively help you manage your portfolio. So here's just a little bit more detail in what we offer as part of our only representative service. Of course, standard with this service is guidance for UK REACH compliance. It's new regulation, only started this year, and there's still a lot of new things that people are learning about all of the time. Our consultants try to keep abreast of these developments as proactively as possible so that we're all ready to answer questions that any of our clients might have. And we provide guidance for UK REACH as part of our only representative services. The other thing we need to do is create a comply with REACH account. So if you're familiar with EU REACH, EU REACH has a service called REACH IT. Under UK REACH, it's called Comply with REACH. That account allows you to make submissions or allows your only representative to make submissions on behalf of your supply chain. The other things that we do is maintain a substance inventory, as mentioned. We help with registration timelines. We make the submissions. We manage substance group communications. So under EU REACH, this might have been called Substance Information Exchange Forums, or SIEFs, or it might be now called the Joint Submission. Under UK REACH, that will be the substance group, and there'll be communications around that. And I suppose after their April deadline, those communications or those discussions will really start to ramp up about who's going to be the lead registrant and how you're going to sell access to data. We can also expect communications from the UK HSE on your registrations. We submit registrations when necessary. As I mentioned, we do the annual maintenance, and then we also can help manage communications with your GB-based customers. As well as providing UK REACH only representative services, we have other related services that are applicable to UK REACH and EU REACH. As Gary mentioned, an important thing to do with regards to managing your costs is undertake a compliance assessment, and we offer that as a standard service. We can also help develop compliance strategies. If you have a very bespoke supply chain, we can work that through with you and identify the pros and cons of a different or various different approaches for compliance in your supply chain. We also have support on notifications, such as Article 7.2 notifications, support on registration, that's lead registrations and non-lead registrations. We can also make authorization applications on your behalf, and that's both under EU REACH and UK REACH. We also have consortium management services, and at the moment we manage over 20 consortia, manage the registration of over 120 substances for EU REACH. We also offer safe management or substance group management as well for both EU REACH and UK REACH. Okay, we're getting towards the end of our slide presentation. Just a summary of key takeaways for today. We talked in detail about the role of an only representative. One of the key takeaways there is to select the right only representative that can support your product portfolio. Next, we talked about complying with UK REACH requirements. UK REACH is new to everyone. There's a number of new transitional arrangements that probably we don't have an example of this way of working before. So it's really good if you could understand the different compliance actions that might need to be taken in order to continue compliance with the regulation. And we talked about managing compliance costs. For myself personally, the key standout for that is choosing the right owner representative, and ensuring that you have full transparency for using owner representative services. And then finally, we talked about how TSG can help. We talked a little bit about the service that we offer, but if you were interested, and if you haven't done so already, if you wanted a more concrete proposal from TSG, then you can follow up with us after this webinar, and we'd be happy to prepare a introductory phone call, so we can talk about your business, and we'd be happy to prepare a proposal for our services. Okay, so that's the end of our content of the presentation, and now we're going to go on to questions and answers. Gary, have you got some questions lined up for us?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Stephen. So yeah, just while I'm pulling these up, let's see what we can get through. And just to say that anything we don't get around to, we will respond via email. So don't worry if you don't get yours read out. Okay, so our first question here, we have, can a non-GB legal entity be the importer under UK REACH? Okay, so Stephen, I'll pass it to you. I guess this very simple answer is no, but there's a great deal of nuance behind that answer.
Absolutely. As you're right, Gary, the answer to that question is no. A non-GB based company cannot be a duty holder under the regulation, and therefore cannot undertake the necessary compliance actions themselves directly in order to comply with the regulation. However, there are certain scenarios. There's many different types of commercial arrangements between companies across lots of different markets. And one scenario might be where a non-GB manufacturer is helping place goods under customs supervision, and then there's some complexities about who actually is the importer here. Is it, the non-GB company, or is it GB end user, or so on and so on? In those weird or non-standard kind of supply chain setups, it's just important that at least one person or one company in that supply chain volunteers to take on the obligations on behalf of the supply chain. And it's really a commercial decision for the most case about which company that might be. So to answer the question, Gary, no, non-GB companies cannot be duty holders under the regulations, but there is ways that things can be managed if there are complexities.
Okay, sure. So we have another question, and this is, what happens if you miss the deadline for the end of March for lead dossiers? Okay, so Karen, I'm going to pass this to you. I think there's two things that stand out to me in that straight away.
Okay. So yeah, I think they might have got the deadline wrong. I think the end of March is not the deadline. I think they're referring to the grandfathering deadline, which is the end of April. Now, if I understand correctly, I mean, maybe they have previously had a GB based OR, or maybe they're maybe they're still looking to appoint a GB based OR. But I think what they're trying to say is that yes, it doesn't matter if you do miss the deadline, but the key is if they want to be a lead registrant, they do want to get in there as early as possible, because it's our understanding that HSE will open up the lead registrant position once all the grandfathering applications have been submitted, and so that will open up at the end of April, beginning of May. So yes, it would be beneficial for them to get their application in as soon as possible.
Okay, yeah, I think that's fairly clear. Thank you, Karen. Okay, we've got time for another one. Okay, how will companies get access to the data they need for their registrations? Okay, Stephen, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that for the most part, the information needed to submit UK REACH registrations will already have been used for EU REACH compliance. And the companies that want to access or use this data within UK REACH, they will know what other companies are wanting to register the substances as well. Once, as Karen says, the grandfathering deadline has been passed, and also as and when Article 26 inquiries and DUINs are submitted by other companies, and that will form the substance group. And it will be that substance group that will probably look to those EU REACH registrants for access to the data that they need in order to submit their full registration dossier, in effect. So the substance group will coordinate that once that's established under UK REACH. But just thinking about the history of this, for the most part, it will be the substance group seeking to get that information from the EU REACH registrants. I don't think that anyone really wants to undertake a lot of new studies because of the costs and the times associated with that. And in most cases, it's probably going to be better if they can buy access to data that's already being generated.
Yeah, that's it. Obviously, best to avoid any need for study replication, and for multiple reasons. That's true. Okay, how are we doing for let's do another one. What happens if the grandfathering deadline is missed? Karen?
Okay, well, in the case of today, where we're looking for non-GB based companies, I imagine if you'll be appointing an OR, and you'll be covering your GB based importers. So it's our understanding that if you miss the grandfathering deadline, then you still will be able to submit a downstream user import notification to cover all your GB based importers. But of course, the disadvantage to that is that in grandfathering, you get a full substance registration for free. But with the downstream user notifications, you will get the notification for free, but actually the substance registration fee will still be required later on down the line. So yeah, it's cheaper in the long run to get those grandfathering applications in. So yeah, get going.
Absolutely. So the answer is, yeah, don't miss it. Don't miss the deadline.
No, everyone to save money.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, let's do one more. What is the deadline for an Article 26 inquiry? Now, Karen, I don't think there is hasn't been a deadline laid out for this in the same way that we have for the other types of notification.
No, that's correct, Gary. I mean, it's just like EU REACH. The inquiry process will be there continually as the regulation goes on, and there is no actual deadline for inquiries. You can submit them at any point in time.
Just to add to that as well, I understand that you have to have submitted the Article 26 inquiry and had a result from the UK HSE before you can continue the import of the substance. So in a roundabout way, the deadline is before the import begins, but that's slightly.
That's true. Yeah. So set your own deadline on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're coming to the end of our allotted time. So just to reiterate again, we will anything we haven't been able to get round to answering, we'll get back on email from that one, and hopefully build some good contacts with everyone listening. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to my colleagues Stephen and Karen for their very thorough explanations of all matters UK REACH, and thanks once again for listening.
Thank you.